going to talk about the gospel today, and before we get into our text, we'll be looking in a moment in Galatians. We're going to have a little fun. Here's what I'd like for you to do. I want to have a little crowd participation here, and here's the question. You know, how much of something? Let me rephrase the question here. I'm struggling with putting this into words. You know, over time, you can lose some key ingredients of special recipes. And my participation for you this morning is I want you to share a little bit with one another. What's the worst you've ever messed up a recipe that's been given to you? Here's what I'm thinking about is you know, my grandmother, actually on my mother's side, could make incredible homemade biscuits, just incredible. And every time she's home with the Lord, and I just have a feeling they're baking biscuits in heaven this morning, but she could make incredible biscuits. And every time I was at her house, which was often, there were always biscuits, always. You just made biscuits. You didn't have to have a special occasion. Life was a special occasion, and you made biscuits. And they were wonderful. Now, please forgive me, Mom, but my dad makes incredible biscuits. Mom can make good biscuits too, but Dad he carries on the tradition there and the great biscuit making tradition in my family tree. And so Dad's biscuits are incredible. They certainly resemble my grandmother's biscuits a great deal. They're awesome. And Dad can bring it. Now I learned to make biscuits. I did early in life. My grandmother took the time. Even my dad took the time. You know, third generation. I'm destined to be a biscuit maker. My biscuits don't look like their biscuits. My biscuits don't taste like their biscuits. My biscuits require quite a bit more butter and jelly to really be good. Really, the jelly needs to sort of outweigh the biscuit, if you know what I'm saying. And when you look at something like that, you know, over time, what can happen is pretty soon, if I teach Nick to make biscuits, they may not even be biscuits by the time they get to the fourth generation. You might look at it and say, what is that? It's not a biscuit. Doesn't look like a biscuit, doesn't taste like a biscuit. It's not a biscuit. At what point do you lose so much of something that it's not what it was before you lost it? That was my question, and you understand why I struggled. At some point, you lose so much of something that it's not what it was. So take a moment. I want you to turn to someone and say, what's the worst recipe you've ever messed up? I'll bet a lot of you have had recipes handed down to you. So I want you to share with your neighbor. Take a moment, share with your neighbor, and just talk about the worst recipe you've ever messed up. And if you've never cooked anything in your life, don't be throwing stones at anybody that has. There are some messed up recipes in the house. I can tell. And Lynn, she's praying I don't talk about the tuna casserole. I know. So I'm not going to tell you about the tuna casserole. Well, it was bad. It was her grandmother's tuna casserole recipe. And I've shared this before, but it was the casserole that never finished. I think we cooked it for 6 hours. It looked like a science fiction movie. It did. It was scary. I had nightmares about the tuna casserole. It just kept bubbling. It never did finish. But I won't tell them about it, baby, because that was a long time ago. You know, Paul had a concern in Galatians, and much more serious than our recipes, but yet there's an element of that illustration that applies. When is the gospel not the gospel? I want to talk to you for the next few Sundays about the gospel, what it means to understand the gospel, what it means to live the gospel, and in order to share the gospel, I believe we do need to have a grasp of that. We need to understand the essence of the gospel. We need to understand how that essence translates into living the gospel and how that's shared.